the effect is that lives and livelihoods are destroyed, changed within seconds. And in the immediate aftermath after such an event, the challenge is how to respond. So there will be aid agencies, government agencies coming into the area, trying to alleviate the suffering, help people in need. And we support with spatial analysis, with real-time local information.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Mapscaping podcast. My name is Daniel and this is a podcast for the Geospatial community. Today I'm talking to Catherine from an organisation called MapAction, and she's going to tell us a little bit about what MapAction does and how they support other organisations in times of humanitarian emergencies. Hope you enjoy the interview. Well, today I'm lucky enough to have Catherine from an organisation called MapAction in the studio with me today. Well, she's not actually in the studio. I am here in Denmark and she is in Italy. But we're talking together and it's going to be good. Catherine, can you tell us a little bit about your background and then what MapAction is?
So I'm a geographer and I did MSc in Geographic Information Science and GIS at UCL in London. And whilst I was studying, I heard about this very interesting charity called MapAction, who are based in the UK and who basically provide humanitarian, geospatial analysis and maps to support responders in the humanitarian crisis. And I was lucky enough to get involved early on. So the charity exists since 2003, and I joined in 2004.
Okay, so you talked a little bit there about providing mapping products or doing mapping for first responders and humanitarian mapping. Can you say a little bit about that? What are we actually talking about here?
It's basically after a disaster, usually it's natural disasters, but it's becoming more and more slow onset conflict type disasters. But usually we focus on natural disasters. So there might be a flood, an earthquake, hurricane hits an area, which it strikes without warning, usually apart from typhoons, who will usually have some warning. And the effect is that lives and livelihoods are destroyed, changed within seconds. And in the immediate aftermath after such an event, the challenge is how to respond. So there will be aid agencies, government agencies coming into the area, trying to alleviate the suffering, help people in need. And we support with spatial analysis, with real-time local information. We are present on site and help producing maps showing this changed situation on the ground and help responders with decision making.
So I guess we're all used to seeing those really dramatic images of helicopters landing and people jumping out and distributing aid to people, setting up tents and starting to help people and sort of trying to get to grips with what's happened and what's going to happen next. And it sounds like that MapAction is providing the mapping data for those people, the geospatial analysis for those different organizations. But I guess the question is for me is why don't those different organizations have mapping people on the ground already? Well, why do we need another organization?
So basically we are trained to do exactly that. So MapAction has a pool of volunteers. At the moment, it's about 70 volunteers, and half of them are available and trained to go out within 24, 38 hours notice. And we are trained not only in GIS and mapping, but also in the humanitarian system, how it all works. We get there quickly, set up our kit, and have procedures in place to provide or to produce mapping and spatial analysis rather quickly. Whereas it seems to be that currently, or even, I mean, it's changed a bit in the last 10 years. So initially, there wasn't, like 15 years ago, there wasn't any agency providing any mapping or analysis of information. So we really fill the gap then. Now it's changed in that there are now different agencies. So even big agencies like World Health Organization, like UNICEF, who will have mapping experts in their organization, but they usually don't. Or at the moment they don't. It might change. They don't deploy in the first response phase. So they would support their organizations from their headquarter offices in whatever, and usually in the country capital city. And they're not set up to provide this kind of service, mapping service, analysis service to everyone, whereas we are there to provide this information to everyone who wants it, who needs it, who is there, be it government organizations, NGO organizations, any relief organization who's there, and our maps can help them. So it's a kind of the mapping cell for the whole response operation.
Already I've got this image in my mind of some sort of black ops mapping team that are there to save the day. So you jump out of your helicopters, and I'm thinking you're prepared a little bit before you even got in the helicopter. What kind of things do you have to think about before you deploy to such a situation?
We do several things. So we do before we deploy, depending on, so usually it will take 24, 48 hours to sort out visas, flights, etc., traveling arrangements. And in that time that's available before, a team of usually minimum 2 people, depending on the scale of the disaster, might be up to 10 people. There will be a data scramble. So for the area affected, that we know is like it's not always the information isn't always there, but we will start, or the entire team will start to gather data, which is usually baseline data, but also data on population, any data that might already at this early stage be available on the situation, be it could be at the track of a hurricane across land. But at the same time, the staff in MapAction will produce a security brief. There will be information on medical situations, so any what vaccinations we need to have in this part of the world. We will establish before we go out contacts with our partners, whether who's going out there, who's already in country. So we will travel there with data, hopefully with information on the security situation, and and we have to prepare the kit as well. So we usually go there with large boxes full of equipment with A3, A4 printers, a number of laptops, GPS units, satellite phones, all sorts of networking equipment. Yeah, that's so there's quite a bit of preparation happening very fast before we go out.
It sounds like it, and I guess you've got to be prepared for almost anything. Now, if I was tasked with the job of sharing information, geographic information to various different organizations, immediately I'd think of some kind of web server where I could update information at one place and have it distributed automatically to people. But I'm assuming that in a disaster situation, this kind of network, this kind of internet connectivity is probably not possible. Is that correct?
In fact, there are organizations now. Again, it's changed to the years ago. So now, like for instance, I've been to Mozambique for the response to Hurricane Idai, and we got there early on. But there already were organizations that they have this role of providing internet connectivity. So the organizations like Ericsson Response, Telecom Sans Frontières, and it's developed in such a way that often, in most cases, I would say, we get there and there is some sort of connectivity, which we then use to, because we share, obviously we use maps to share, to provide locally, but we also upload our products and data we can gather on site. We upload our data to our website, to Relief Web, to a number of websites that are used by humanitarian actors to get information.
Okay, so now you're on site. You've figured out what kind of options you have in terms of connectivity, in terms of networking, and before you even left home, you gathered a whole bunch of data. So you arrived there. What are the first kind of data collection activities do you do? Like what kind of data is important to you, and that maybe you can only get once you're on the ground?
It's so baseline data we would have, in most cases, we would have got before we get there. When we get there, it's any situational information we can find. So it's what's most important. Depends a bit on this disaster, on the scenario. But what's most important in all types of scenarios is where is the population most vulnerable population? Where are the people affected, and what are their needs? So starting from baseline population, which we would have normally brought with us already, we would talk to partners on the ground and try to get this kind of information as detailed as possible. The other sets of information we often, again, depending on the situation, is transport access. So which roads are passable, which bridges are down, are there any security issues, and obviously where, other information like which organizations are working where. So so this kind of is probably the key information.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you said that baseline population data, where are people affected, or where are most of them anyway, that was the most important piece of data for you guys when you first arrive on the ground. And I guess that's one of the things too that would be really difficult to capture automatically. So over the last few years, we've seen this huge increase in our ability to walk around with a cell phone, for example, and use machine learning to capture the built environment in terms of map data. But I'm assuming in terms of population data, or that sort of data focused on humans and their well-being, that would be really difficult to automate.
Depends on the situation, but it's a matter of so for instance, maybe if you take a recent example, so the floods. So first is the storm damage, and there were floods in Mozambique in a large, huge area, and it did take about 2 weeks, involving a number of helicopter flights using little tablet devices to get so following a gridded approach, standard type, almost like a search and rescue setup, trying to find out where are the people affected. So flying over in a 2 week period over the area, um, getting those figures. If you don't have this kind of information, it would mean you won't be able to target the delivery of aid to the right places. So it's something, because the situation changes after events like this strike. You wouldn't be able to automate or generate this information unless you are in the field and do something like a flyover or walkover survey.
Now, again, in the last few years, we've seen huge advances in terms of what we can do from satellites. And from the pre-interview, I know that you talked about a few space agencies help you guys out, and they provide data. What can you use this kind of data for?
So we would use flood extents as so there are, like you said, there are various space agencies providing flood extents, and they provide updated extent information um, depending on availability of satellite information regularly. And we can use this to delimit or um, to reduce the area of where people potentially are affected. It doesn't mean areas that are flooded, there are people. So if you overlay population presence from pre-disaster with the flood extent, it doesn't mean necessarily that everyone is affected, but it helps narrowing down the area to search or focusing on some areas to do an assessment and get more information on affected areas and needs in those areas.
Now, I'm assuming that to do this kind of work, you'd have to have a certain set of skills, and obviously, understanding of geospatial and data and GIS and that kind of thing, they're really important. But I'm assuming you'd need a whole bunch of other different skills. You talked about that sort of that background in humanitarian activity, so understanding how these other organizations think and react and what their mandate is in a disaster situation. Can you say a few more things about the kind of skills that you're looking for in the volunteers that do this work for MapAction?
One of the, so obviously, like, okay, you mentioned already the GIS skills. The other, I think, big trait we are looking in people is team players. So it's basically you're very much going out into an area where you don't really know what you're going to find. So if you imagine you pack your bags, you set off on a plane with other people, and you do want to be able to rely on them a little bit. So it's you do have to have characters that are confident in foreign, uncomfortable even environments, and who are um, who can cope with these situations and who are team players basically. So and the other, so we're looking for these kind of people. And also what helps is we do run trainings and participated trainings regularly in the UK, as well as external trainings where we participate but also train in the humanitarian context simulation exercises. And those regular trainings help that we do know this person we'll be deploying with. So out of this pool of 70 people, it's usually a given that I know this person a little bit. So it's so which then means, and because we train our procedures, it means there's no how do you call it? There's no, so it's we can start working straight away, um, knowing each other somewhat.
So it sounds like you need obviously a lot of technical skills, but you need a lot of personal skills, I would call them, and almost like survival skills and good sort of networking skills. And I think too, you also must need to be have a certain amount of flexibility, because if you're talking about deploying for an unspecified length of time to a situation or to a country you've never been to before, with 24 hours notice, that must there must be very few people that have that kind of flexibility in their lives, I'm thinking.
Yes, that's why the pool of volunteers needs to be fairly large, so that when does something happen and there's a call going out, who's available, who can leave straight away, basically. And there's often, it's not like all 70 say yes, I can go, um, because we all have full-time jobs. Some of us have family, so it doesn't happen all the time that one can go, even though we all would like to deploy and put our skills to use. It's yeah, it needs to coincide with the work, and we are very grateful if our employers let us go as well. So they contribute, they support the charity as well in that sense, that they give us give us leave at short notice, so let us go at short notice.
Catherine, I've just got a couple more questions for you, but before I let you go, and the first one is, how would I get involved with this? If I'm sitting out there, I'm listening to this podcast episode, and I think, wow, that's something I would really like to do. What would I need to do to be involved with the organization of MapAction?
So you can always have a look at our website to get more information. So it's www.mapaction.org. And there will be a general email address you can write to and ask about types of involvement. Usually, the last years we run recruiting processes at the beginning of the year. It depends a bit. I'm not sure if it's going to happen next year or not, but it's quite likely it will. So you can inquire on this general email address, asking about the possibility of joining the charity and also detailing in what capacity, how would you would like to be involved. Doesn't need to be operational. It can be in a support capacity.
And my last question here is, can you see an improvement? Are we getting better at this disaster relief in terms of our mapping capabilities? You talked a little bit before about different organizations showing up now, and they're tasked with providing networks and providing this IT infrastructure. And you also said that more and more organizations are starting to have like a mapping resource somewhere in the background, not necessarily on the ground in the actual disaster zone, but somewhere out there. So, in general, can you say that we're getting better at disaster relief mapping?
Definitely, yeah, I would definitely say it's improved a lot. Also regarding coordination, so that we established these contacts. Different players have partnered up. There's websites sharing information, data, maps. It's all it's a much more coordinated effort now, I would say.
Catherine, on behalf of all the people listening to this podcast episode, I really want to thank you for the work you do, for the help you give to the people that really need it in these disaster situations, and for coming along this podcast and telling us a little bit about your work and yeah, and sharing your story with us. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much.
And that's it for another episode of the Mapscaping podcast. My name is Daniel, and I would just like to tell you that I would be eternally grateful to you if you would share this with a friend that you think might enjoy it, and you are more than welcome to reach out to me on social media for whatever reason. You'll find a lot of useful links in the show notes. Thanks very much. Talk again next week. Bye.